Now we are going to discuss about chapter 3 to extract data from source transaction underscore AGG table and load the data into HTTP transaction underscore AGG. Here we are going to discuss about the concept called mapping variable. So let us look at where these tables are. Source table is in the source database. Talking about this 7, the table. Are you all in the lab? Your ID underscore transaction. That is the source table. For me, it will be source underscore transaction underscore. We are now going to extract the data from the source and load the data into under the staging database. Again, from the stage transaction underscore, we are going to extract the data back staging staging. Now, first we are going to discuss about the source underscore transaction underscore AG. That is a source table data into transaction. And we will discuss about the incremental strategy in this. So this is business case 17. The purpose of this lab is to load incremental data into the target table, that is your staging table. The concept is mapping variable. So I'm going to do now. This is my requirement. Extract the data from source table and load data into staging table and do the strategy. If you remember, we have discussed the data warehouse concepts class. We have a source, have a staging, have a dimension tables or the fact table. What we discussed, we are going to extract the data from a single source or multiple sources. To load data into the database, we need a staging area to load the data. And if it is having a single source system also, we need a staging area, which we discussed then. That if you want to load, we discussed the concept called incremental loading strategy. That is, we are going to extract the data from the source which was created or modified on a particular day and load the data into the staging. And before loading the data into the staging, we are going to delete the data in the staging, that is the previous data. That's what we have discussed in our discussion of data warehouse concepts regarding the incremental loading strategy and also what is the staging, why we delete the data in this. Now, we are going to discuss the logic of incremental loading strategy. Then we will discuss how to implement in informatica. Please observe this example, very important concept in the data warehouse projects. Now, happened in the OLTP system, I have a source table. Let's say in the OLTP system, they have entered the transaction 101 product for dealership ID 10 for a price of 100 on January 10th, 2005. Like any mall or any shop, when you buy something, at what shop you have bought it and what is the product ID and the price. Another transaction happened in the OLTP system, and you have created the data in the OLTP system. And I hope you remember the concept where we discussed about the load window, in which we discussed the time given for to complete the ETL process. That is the schedule, at what time we are going to extract the data from the source systems. So let us assume that you have a schedule at every day 2 a.m. Today you are going to load the data in the transaction systems. Then at 2 a.m. that is on 11th January at 2 a.m. you are going to extract the data from transactional system and load it into the staging area from the data warehouse perspective. So what we do, on 11th January we'll schedule our ETL program. We'll extract the data from the source table. So we'll extract the data from the source table. That is transaction which happened on 10th January 2005. Then we load the data into our staging transaction on 11th January at 2 a.m. Then next day what happened? Your data in your source system and the table. Now on 11th January 103, a product ID at dealership 30 was price 100, transaction happened. 104 product at dealership ID 20 for price 2, a transaction happened. So now as per your data warehouse, you need to extract the data on 12th January at 2 a.m. The data we are going to extract, we are going to extract the data from transactions which are created on 11th January or greater than 10th January 5, because already we have loaded yesterday, previous load 10th January. So you extract the data from the table. Their data is new or modified on 11th January. Please observe the date, understand the date. On 11th January transaction which happened, we are going to extract it because 10th January already we have loaded into the staging. Then before we load data into the staging, we have to delete the data in the staging. That is with the assumption here, the assumption is we are going to extract the data from the source staging, from staging to the dimension tables target. If you remember our employee loading, we created one mapping to extract the data from source to staging. Another mapping from staging to your dimension or your factory. So with this assumption that after you have loaded the data on 11th January 2005 from your source, the staging of the transactions happened on 10th January one mapping, the mapping which we are discussing here now, and with the assumption that we have already created the second mapping, And the second mapping is extracted the data from staging to dimension fact table. That assumption that after you have loaded the 10th January data, second mapping is extracted and loaded into dimension fact table. So after this loading is completed, if you observe, this will contain 10th January data, transactions, it also will contain 10th. Now we are discussing 11th January transactions happened in our source. So already you have loaded the data into the dimension table and fact table with that assumption mapping. So what we are saying, we are going to delete the data in our staging table. This is correlate to our 6 parallel loading of source extracting the data from stage employees to stage employees, from stage employees to dimension employees, where we data in the same concept we are discussing here. So on 12th January 2005, you have extracted the data of 11th January 2005 transactions which happened in the you extracted. Before you load the data, you deleted the data from the then you inserted those transactions. So our discussion, delete the data, extract and load. Now what happened next day? Your source data. On 101, another transaction happened on 12th January 5, and another transaction happened on January 5. Now, what does the mapping do? Get the dates. On 13th January, next day, 8 AM, you extract the data from the source, which transactions have been created on 12th January 2005. For you load, you delete the data in the state 13. Now, let's go back again. First step. What we are doing here? We are doing what we require. A very simple logic. What we require is, one, you have to delete the data in the staging before you load the data into. That is, delete the previous data which is there in this one requirement. And when every time you load the data, you have to extract only the data was created or updated with modified records that particular date. In our case, transaction. So how they extract the data? Look at it from a layman terms. Who do they extract? Generally, how do they write the select statement? Select column 1, column 2, column 3, compare 1, here, let's say transaction greater than 9th January 5. So let's assume that source transaction happened as per your schedule. 2 AM on 11th January. You extract it. What we do? We'll select the data where transaction date is greater than 9th January 5. first time, that is the first time there is a data in the, you are extracting it, the transaction. So it will extract the data. After the January 2005, those records will be extracted. Step by step, we'll implement the logic, understand it. On 11th January 2005 at 2 a.m., you are going to extract the data. Assume today you are extracting it, yesterday's data you are taking out. So, but we say greater than 9th January. And you load the data into your stage. Now next day, when the transaction happens, look at the data source table. You have 10th January data. You have loaded into transaction. Now in the source system on 11th January, some transactions happen. At 103, product ID, sold at 100 rupees, $100, 11th January, another product. So the transaction happened in the. Now from the data warehouse perspective, scheduling load window concept at 2 a.m. on 12th January, your program from source to staging should be, the first program session has to be executed on 12th January 2005, 12th January 2005 on 2 a.m. early morning, as per the schedule, program execute. So it needs to extract the data from the source transaction agent table for the transactions which were created or data where data is new or modified on 11th January 5. What we are called as. Already we processed 10th January, so we need to take the 11th January 5 data. So we extract the data. How will we extract? We'll write a select statement and say where transaction date is 10th January. Please observe here. If you look at it from another perspective, another dimension, another understanding, already you have loaded previous run 10th January. If you look at it from another perspective, we are saying greater than this already loaded data into my run into my staging. That is, what was the last load which happened in my transaction in my staging table? Greater than that I should extract. Greater than that I should extract. Or if you look at the other way, on 12th January when I am extracting the data, what was the previous load? It was still 10th January. So on 12th January we should say, great, give me the transactions which happened which are new or modified on 11th January data. Or better way is, already which have been loaded in this in the staging table. Next time when I execute it, I should extract only greater than this data. That is 10th January 2005, greater than that 10th January. If you want to correlate it, it is nothing but greater than whatever has been loaded into my staging table in the previous run. So, this is the data extracted from my source. Before I load, I delete the data in my staging area. Then I insert into my staging table. The catch is, you observe the catch is, we are going to extract the data greater than what we have loaded at the previous time. We are going to extract the data from the source table what we have extracted in the previous run. That makes sense for us because we are going to process only the records which are not processed. We are going to extract the data from the source system where the records which we didn't process. To look at it that way, that is, already we have loaded the data into the transaction staging table. Greater than that, we will need to extract the data next time when we run it. So I extract it greater than 10th January 2005, then delete the data in the staging table, insert the data into of the transactions extracted from. This loading is called incremental loading. We are not going to extract the complete data. We are going to extract only the data which was created, new or updated in my source table. How do I know which records I have to take? I'll say whichever has been loaded already in my staging table, greater than that I will extract the next time. Because if I load it into my staging, I assume that my second session will take the data and process it and all that stuff. So with that understanding, with that clarity, that already which I have loaded into my staging, the previous run, greater than that I will take it from my source table. Now next day, let us assume the OLTP system on 12th January 2005 data has been inserted into my staging table. Of 12th January 2005. Now how will we do that? This is the data in my staging. From the data warehouse perspective, at 2 a.m. on 13th January, we need to extract the data, which will happen on 12th January. How are we saying this? Because already we have loaded the data into the staging previous session, that 11th January we already loaded. So we are going to next time what we are going to extract? Transactions which happened on 12th January 2005. So what I will do? I will say greater than 11th January 2005. Greater than 11th January 2005, extract it. Then delete the data from my staging, load the data into my staging area of 12th January transaction. So how are we going to implement this in my informatica mapping strategy? I have to build some strategy such a way that it will be very easy for me to do this logic. Please understand the logic. Doing it in informatica will be very easy. Somehow, when you are loading extracting the data from the source, which has transaction date is, let's say, 10. This is my staging area. So I should build some way while extracting the data. We say I'll put the data as key date 9th January 2005 or whatever it is. So it will extract the transactions which happened on 10th January. First time when you load it, will extract the data and you delete it, then you load it into staging. So there is no data in the staging, but you have loaded the data into the staging of 10th Jan. Now observe it. Next time when you extract the data from the source, what we need to extract? Greater than this staging area. Greater than, 10th Jan. Why greater than 10th Jan? Because already we have loaded the data into the staging area. So next time when I extract it, I should take only the transactions which happen greater than 10th January 2005. So whenever I load the data into my staging, I need to take next time greater than that only. Because of incremental loading strategy, we have already processed 10th January, we have to take 11th January like that. So in my mechanism, my informatica, or logic. Informatica, I should find such a way that while loading the data into my staging, I have to capture the date, the maximum date or date which is loaded into the stage. So for example, while loading the data into the staging area, I capture in some variable or some field what was my maximum date of that in my staging area. So after you load till 10th January, then somehow in my mapping mechanism I capture that variable field as staging area as 10th January. So next time when I execute it, while extracting the data, I say transaction date greater than this variable or field which contains 10th Jan. So in a simple sense, you extract the data and load the data into staging. While loading the data into staging, you will capture what was the maximum date which has been loaded into my staging area, and I reuse that variable, that value in my extraction process. So two things we have to do. One is we will delete the data staging area. Informatica, how we will delete the target property? We'll say 3SQL they delete from the staging area. Second step, we are going to extract the data. So in the source call file, we'll write the thread space greater than 9th January 2005. And somehow we need to capture the maximum date of the transaction date which is into such that we can next time say greater than that maximum. This is what we are going to do in our Informatica. So first step, we are going to import the source structure, import from database, from SRC, because the table is in SRC. Source underscore transaction underscore AG. For you it is your ID underscore source underscore transaction. Then target, I will import it from STG. Then let us create the mapping. Mapping, create. Transaction. Get the source transaction. Transaction. Best practice. Created. Transfer. Then we need to delete the data in the staging table. Property SQL from transaction. I continue. Go ahead and write this 17 underscore, that is underscore ID underscore your ID underscore SRC, the name SRC underscore informatica, read out an ODB connection, your ID underscore, then underscore ID, password ID. So please write this ODB connection at this 17. So now let us discuss that how to select the data. First time when you are loading the data into staging area, we'll take 9th January 2005. Why 9th January and all that stuff? Let us table. Go to the source and fire the select statement. There is no data in this. Now this has let us see the data in my source transaction and the source table. What is the data I have? 10th January 2005. When I am loading first time, 10th January 2005 is the data we extracted from my source table. Let me go and check the data in my HPG. So there is no data in my target staging table. When you look at the data in my source table, there are records in this. We are going, transaction date is 10 January 5. So what we should do? As per our business logic, let's assume on 11th January, when you execute it, you should say extract the data where transaction date is greater than 9th January. So what will we do? To extract the data 9 January to greater than 9 January 2005, in Informatica, you can write it in SQL override. Source qualifier, properties, generate SQL, and you say where transaction date is greater than I am taking this date because that is the data in my source which contains 10th January 2005 data. I need to extract this data when I execute it. So in the source qualifier, I have written 9th January 2005. Now as per your logic, you have put the delete, and when you execute this, Informatica will extract the data from the source of 10th January 2005 and loads into my staging area. Before it loads, it deletes and loads the data in. Now next time when you execute it, the source system will contain, let's say some transaction happened in your source system on 11th January. From that awareness perspective, when you execute this session, you should extract the data greater than 10th January 2005. Greater than this date, it has to extract. What you do? Again, you go to the Informatica mapping, open it, properties, and say 10th January. This incremental loading, you are extracting the data which is created or modified. But you are changing the date of your incremental loading by manually, which is not acceptable in Informatica or in any data warehouse. Not in Informatica, in data warehouse project, it is not acceptable. Every time you go and change manually in production, imagine you are in a production, you cannot go and open the mapping and change the dates and all that stuff. It is not allowed, and it's practically impossible. So what you should do for this incremental loading, you have to do automation. Somehow you have to do automation, automatically it should be working. For that to implement automatically, we say in Informatica provides you what they call it as mapping variable. Mapping variable is nothing but a global variable. That is, it can remember or it can hold previous data or values, this variable. In a local variable, when you use in a programming, it is when that session is executed or when that program is executed, those variables work. After the execution is over, those variables are cleaned off, and next time when you run it, again it has to be initialized. Whereas when you use a global variable in any programming, after the execution is over, whatever the value is there in that variable, it will be stored. The next time when you execute it, again you can use that value. Same way in a mapping variable, Informatica provides you a global variable where it will remember or hold the previous values data. As usual, whenever you declare a variable, as usual you have to declare a variable first. Then you have to initialize. Then you can assign to that variable, and you can store that variable, value in that variable. So it can remember or it can hold the previous data or variable, declare variable. First we need to declare this variable, then initialize it. How to declare a variable in Informatica? Let us look at it. Mapping, parameters and variables, add. These global variables or Informatica variables are represented by $$T, $$. The symbol $$ means it's a variable, it's an Informatica variable or Informatica kernel to Informatica. So it's represented by $$. So I'm declaring a variable called tDate, which is date, and like any other variable, I will initialize it. This is the syntax: dd/mm/yyyy. So I will initialize to 09/01/2005. I am initializing, first time when I am loading, I am initializing 9th January 2005 because transactions in that table are 10th January 2005 first time. So I initialize my mapping variable to 9th January 2005. And like what I am doing here, I am replacing in my select statement in the source qualifier. Rather than 09 January 2005, I will use my mapping variable, which has a value of January 9th, 2005. Use the mapping variable, my source qualifier. For that I have already defined it. Then how to use it? Properties, You have to put it in single quotes only, greater than. Where is that variable I have declared? Under this variable tab, under this mapping variable, to double click. Under this variable tab, double click, say OK. So at runtime, that variable value will be stored in this, and it's say greater than 9th January 2005. Then you say OK. As Informatica process, it will extract the data from the source, all the 10th January 2005, and load it into the staging table. Now next time when you execute this, what should be the value in that mapping variable it should contain? It should contain whichever is the maximum date while loading the data. What is the maximum date which has been loaded into my transaction table? That value should be there. Because next time when you execute it, these are the transactions happened in my source. 11th January, when you are extracting the data from this, in place of this mapping variable should get 10th January 2005. That is nothing but greater than this. So, while loading the data into my source, from this source and loading into my staging area, somehow I should have a mechanism to capture the maximum transaction date into my mapping variable. This is global variable. I store that value. So as per this example, the maximum value is 10th January 2005. I store it in mapping variable, which will be stored internally in the repository of Informatica. So next time when it runs, that mapping variable will contain 10th January 2005. Then that will be used for this file extracting greater than 10 mapping variable, that is 10th January. So to capture that while loading the data into the staging area, capture that Informatica provides you with a function called the setMax variable. So where will we use it? How will we capture it? Here in the expression transformation, we'll create a port called mapping variable tdate, date and time. You make this as a variable port and say as Informatica provides you with a function called the setMax variable. And whichever you have declared, comma, with which field you are comparing the function. So what happens? So observe very carefully this and try to understand it. Function is very important. Now let us assume here source data and just put record number 1 and 10th. Record number 2 have 10th Jan 5. Also, how it works, that's what I am discussing. Is your source In between you have the expression. In this we have written the function set max. I'm talking about function, or I'll put it this way. Then this is the target date. That is your staging. Now when you execute it, in that where clause, you said greater than transaction date greater than $$ variable. That is your mapping variable. So what happens with this function? That is what I am trying to focus now. Informatica extracted the data. First record comes in to your expression transformation. Row by row, first record comes in with the transaction date 10th January 2005. Now what will happen in this set max variable function? Already you have defined this $. What did you say for $, T date? You have initialized to 09 Jan 2005. So when the first record is executed, comes into the expression transformation, this will contain 2005, compares. What is the transaction date? 10th Jan 2005. What is the functionality of this? You have assigned this in a variable field. The field called variable field, that you have assigned this function in the expression transformation. Where it is, I'll show you once again. This is what I'm talking about. We have created one variable, made it at a variable port, and we have set this. So record has come into my expression transformation. 1/10 January 2005. First record 10th January 2005. Now the data is coming to this mapping variable. Set max variable compares. The functionality of set max is it will compare both these values. Whichever is the maximum, that will store in this port. So it will be 10th January 2005. Then the first record is inserted into my target table. Then the second record comes into my expression transformation. Now this $T date will contain 10th January 2005. Now it's changed. Transaction is processing. So this will contain, what is 10th Jan 2005? What is the transaction date? 10th Jan 2005. Set max variable. No change. Fine. Now this second record is also loaded into your staging table. Now session, no more record, session completed. So what does Informatica do? When the session is completed, whatever is the value stored in this variable port will be replace this variable data in the repository of Informatica. This $$ variable will be stored in the repository. So it will update the repository to 10th January 2005. So next time when it executes it, what happened next time? You have 10th January 2005 data in your source. 10th January 2005 data in your source. and another transaction happened on 11th January 2005, and another transaction, the source happened on 11th January 2005. So this is your source data. What happened in your source qualifier, what you have written in your source, set select, where T date is greater than, that is transaction date is greater than $$ variable. So what does $$ variable it contains? 10th January 2005. So it will replace this 10th Jan 2005 greater than 10th Jan 2005. So what data it will extract? It will extract these two records in your source. Then in your expression transformation, there you have set max variable functionality. First record comes in this. So what will be the value in this? $T date contains 10th Jan 2005, transaction date 11th Jan 2005. Whichever is the maximum, that will be stored in that variable port, and the third record will be loaded. Again the fourth record will come in. So what will be the date here? Jan 2005, comma 11th Jan 2005. Both are same, no change. Session is completed. When the session is completed, what does Informatica does? It will go and change this T date to 11th Jan. It will be stored in the repository. Next time when you execute it, it should be greater than 11th January. So this is how Informatica works of mapping. So let me create the mapping once again for you so that it will be clear for you. I define the source, I define the target. Now go to the mapping. I say create. Please follow the steps very carefully. 17 stg underscore transaction underscore AGT score 1. Drag your source, drag your target, transformation create, expression, stg transaction, the target table properties, pre-SQL, get delete from stg transaction underscore AG. Now to define a mapping variable, please observe it. Mapping create mapping parameters and variables. Add should be represented by $. T date. Make it as date time. Don't forget it. It should be date time. We will initialize with 0901. It is how to initialize the variable. (0901) 2005. It is MMDDYY format. And you say OK. Then in the source qualifier, properties, pre-SQL, just hold on for a minute. the SQL query, generate SQL, and we'll write here where transaction date is greater than single quotes, where transaction date is greater than single quotes. Wherever you declare the variable, this is the variable $T date. Quotes transaction date greater than $T date. That is a mapping variable. Now how to include this functionality of set max variable and all that stuff? Open your expression transformation, add a field, name it MV underscore T date, make it as a date time, but ensure that it should be made variable port. Don't forget it. It should be variable port. Then you say under the variables there is a function called set max variable, and under this variable port we have mapping variable T date comma, with which port you are comparing transaction date validate. Now I am going to create the session and show you how it works. Before I create the session, please write it down this in your 20.9. So please write down this Darcy underscore ID underscore ID. Then I will create it. Session. Task. Create session. Underscore M underscore action. Source. Target. Change per normal and work. Underscore M underscore. Now, open your what we did was, you need to please write down this statement, please. Insert into, please write down somewhere, insert into your ID underscore source underscore transaction, then select start from transaction AGG backup, where transaction date is equal to 10th January 2005. 10th January 2005. For the practice in the lab, that's what I am trying to do. Please write down this somewhere, the worksheet. Insert into your ID underscore source underscore transaction underscore AG. Select start from the single statement. Select start from transaction AGG underscore backup, where transaction is 10th Jan 2005. This is a single statement. Please write it down. Then what we should do in the lab, that's what I'm trying to drive you the point. So, after you have written this, let me go to my source database. First, let me delete all the data You also delete when you do this mapping, when you are about to execute this, you delete this data in yours, then fire this insert statement, insert a 296 records. This data has to be select distinct transaction date. It has 10th January 2005. Transactions happened on 10th January in this table. You have to extract and load it into staging. Just to delete the data of 10th and load this data into staging. So I made a mistake regarding initialization of that variable. It is the format of mmddyy format only. Is mmddyy format, but by mistake I have entered it as 09/01/2005 when I initialized it. I should have entered it as 01/09/2005. So before you run it, change this variable to 01/09/2005. Is mmddyy format. I entered it in a different way. So don't make the mistake. You declare the variable as mmddyy format only. And you initialize it. Now I run my session. So it has loaded the data into my staging area. 296 records. Here also 296 records. Now, practical purpose, I cannot. The scenario which we discussed, that is already 10th data is there, the OLTP system 11th data will be loaded. I cannot manually enter the data into this. So what we have done is, for all practical purpose, we created a table of transaction ATG backup. It has 7 days of data, 10, 11, 12 like that. So I have already inserted into my source 10th day data. Now execute this statement for 11th January data. The source table. So when you see the data in the source, now it contains 10th and 11th, like our example. Now automatically it should extract the data. When you execute this, it should extract the data of 11th January 5 greater than 10th January 2005. It should fire. How do I know what is the value in my transaction mapping variable? What is the value it stored? You open the session log file, the value $t date, it has stored 10th January 2005. So when you execute next time, it will extract the data greater than 10th January 2005, that is 11th January. When it loads the data into staging, it will delete the data and load 11th January data. So let us execute this once again. And how to check it? We'll go back to our stage table. Mistake I did was I didn't commit it. Commit the data. Now you execute. Let us go to the staging. Just to delete the data. and load the data of the existing transaction date. Transaction 11th January. Now test it once again. We will insert 12th January data. This and commit it. Now in your source, you have 3 days data, but when you execute this, should extract only 12th January data and load it into your staging table. Let us go to the staging. There's only 12th January. Like this, then put it till 13. 16, 10, 11, 12, 13. 15 days, 7 days data is there in your transaction. Now, incremental loading works. Now, mapping variable. Let's go ahead and do that.